Hello, and welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast with your host, peak performance coach, Brian Bosley. Are you stuck on the hamster wheel of life, spinning and spinning, but not really moving forward? Are you ready to jump off and soar? Are you finally ready to sculpt your life? If so, you've landed in the right place. This podcast is created and broadcast just for you. All of you strivers, thrivers, and survivors out there. If you'd like to learn more about Brian and the Bamboo Lab, feel free to reach out to explore your true peak level at www.bamboolab3.com.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As you know by now, I'm your host, Brian, and I'm excited to talk today's guest because a wonderful friend of mine that you've all heard on the podcast in the past, Dave Dick, reached out to me a few weeks ago and said, here's a guy you really should have on your show. He's just an interesting human being. He's got a wealth of knowledge to share. So he connected Robert and I. We have Robert Hall on today. So he connected us. Robert and I talked a few weeks ago and hit it off right away. And I thought, this is a guy that I want to learn more from. So I want to just give you a little bit of a shout out of who Robert is. Robert is a noted author, consultant, and speaker on relationships. That's his specialty. He has authored more than 200 published articles on leadership, relationships, and strategic direction. His work has appeared in Forbes magazine, the New York Times, CEO magazine, the Dallas Morning News, and the Huffington Post. His latest book, which is titled The Land of Strangers, The Relationship Crisis That Imperils Home, Work, Politics, and Faith, has been called one of the most influential and most important books of the decade. So my friend Robert, welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Brian, it's great to be with you. I've enjoyed our discussions, and I look forward to this one.
I do too. You have a very, very calming voice. And and I can tell a person's voice and how their voice resonates with my meters that come up here, and your voice is just perfect for what we're doing here today. So
great to hear.
Well, Robert, I've gotten to know a little bit about you, and I've done my research as well. But can you tell us a little more about yourself? You know, your childhood, your family, where you're from, who or what inspired you growing up. I'll let you just go with that for a while.
Sure. Well, it's not particularly noteworthy. I grew up on a ranch in southeastern Oklahoma near a little community called Stewart. I can remember when we had no electricity and no plumbing. That wasn't because we couldn't afford it. It was because it wasn't available there yet. And so there were 20 in my graduating class. My parents were ranchers. My dad was born on that ranch. His dad actually acquired the ranch during the time of Indian Territory in Oklahoma. And as I think so many of us have in our ancestry, they had a really strong faith. They had a terrific work ethic, and they were very strong in their relationships. And that ranch now, our grandkids are fifth generation on that ranch. So, the idea of place mattering, that place really is kind of almost spiritual to us. When I was growing up, as so many people who experience rural backgrounds, work was kind of the center of everything. We fed cattle in the winter from the time I got off the school bus till dark. And then in the summer, we baled hay. We would put up between 1,000 and 2,000 tons in the summer. And I started out as 6-year-old guiding. I'd guide the hay truck for them to load the bales. And then when I was about 9, I graduated to the hay rake, windrowing the hay. And then when I was about 15, started hauling hay. And so that's kind of where I came from. As I look back on my background, I think there's two things that are really kind of my first two loves. And the first love was baseball. I loved to pitch baseball, and eventually it was kind of mediocre when I started, but I blossomed in high school, and I wound up going to turned down an offer with the New York Yankees to pitch for Oklahoma State University. And at that time, they were one of the top 5 programs in the country. In fact, we're in World Series time right now, college baseball. We got beat out in the quarterfinals of the College World Series that first year. And the second love of my life is I met my wife there. I was in this little tiny community, and she was in a slightly larger community called McAllister, and I met her when I was 16, and we dated, went off to college. We got married in college, and so that's kind of a little bit of the background. And when I think about what inspired me, all of those things were a part of me and inspired me. But the way I think about it is really there was a community of relationships that really made a difference. And it's interesting, Raj Chetty at Harvard's done a lot of research recently, and what we're finding in the research is that the community you grow up in matters more than we realize. We often focus on parents, and they're very important, but siblings and community really matter. And so my parents, worked hard. It really was a no victims environment. No matter what happened, you dealt with it, you moved on. One of the things that was really valuable for me, my dad, we had cattle and we did hay baling and all that. So I got a chance from the age of 6 on to see my dad run the business. And we'd have anywhere from 3 or 4 to 10 or 15 people involved in the work there on the ranch and in haying and so forth. And so I really saw what it meant to do the right thing. He was really big on that. Also really experienced kind of the understanding the value of faith, especially in adversity, but also in success. So those were really important lessons. Just an aside, this is kind of typical of my dad. So I grew up, and by the time I was running a couple of hay crews, we paid all the other hay haulers that worked for us. And so bucking 70-pound bales of hay around and so forth. And so we paid all of them. But Dad's investment strategy with me, he kind of, he had a mindset of investment thinking, not spending thinking. And so he said, I'm going to give you a heifer and she will reproduce. And as you have more, we reproduce over time. And by the time you're ready for college, I hope these cattle will pay for your college, and I'll pay for the feed and upkeep and the pasture and so forth, but I'm not going to pay you in money. And it's interesting, that was the norm there. I never thought anything about it, but it was a very interesting kind of investment mindset. So it's interesting when you think of the value of long-term investing that started so early. A couple other people really important inspired me. My older sister went off to college ahead of me. She was the first one in our family to go to college, and she really helped guide me to that. We had a seasonal worker that worked with us every spring when we'd be pulling together Bermuda grass sprigs to plant pastures. His name was Banty, and I would drive the truck on weekends and so forth, and he would load roots with a pitchfork. And Banty loved baseball, and his son was a really good baseball player, played in the minor leagues. And Banty, when I was in the 5th or 6th grade, taught me all kinds of things about pitching and to really love it. And I'd never actually been able to get to pitch on the teams I played on, but he taught me a lot about that. And so that was really important. I had a coach in American Legion ball named Eve Williams, who really believed in me and said, you've got potential in college. There were a couple other people, a guy named Bill Sandmillan, who was at Oklahoma State when I was in high school, and I was up there for an FFA trip, and he went and introduced me to Chet Bryan, the coach there. There was a guy named Larry Wood, who, when I first started pitching as a sophomore, I never really before knew more about pitching and could throw harder than I could, who really taught me a lot, particularly about how you throw inside and how you put on your game face and you don't allow anything to ruffle you. So those were key parts of the community, and each of them played a role. And at the time, probably none of it seemed in any way exceptional, but collectively they made a huge difference in my life.
So they were all pieces of a puzzle that inspired you.
Exactly.
Now, how many were in your family? How many siblings?
I had two sisters themselves, so there were three of us. I was the youngest.
Okay.
And so that was, that's kind of the whole family when I was growing up.
It's amazing, and I've said this so many times on this show, Robert, how many successful, impactful people I have spoken with in the last 3 years of doing this show, 3.5 years, how many people have come from small communities and close families.
Yep.
It's incredible. I never thought that would be the case.
In fact, there's research for that, and it's been a while since I've seen this study, but a disproportionate number of CEOs and leaders in organizations come from small communities, and a lot of them from rural farming, ranching, and so forth, because work and responsibility and accountability are so important. And my dad, my dad was very loving, but he was very tough. And so I had lots of responsibility early on. Just a quick story. So when I was being scouted, the baseball coach at Oklahoma State, Chet Bryan, came to see me pitch the first time. He came up to me before the game and he said, "Now I'm going to be sitting right behind home plate. Every time you look in for a signal, you're going to see my face. I want to see how you can do under pressure." Well, I didn't always realize it because my dad put a lot of pressure on me. But at that moment, I realized, this pressure and this accountability and this responsibility that I've gotten that felt at times, tough, in reality was a gift. And I do believe that's one of the things we are challenged to replicate in today's society. My kids trying to find work and responsibility and so forth is much tougher. So I do think we miss that in today's culture.
I do too. And I think there's something about when you grow up in a small community as well, we think of big cities as there's so many more people, you get to know so many more people, but you really don't. I've lived in bigger cities and you really don't know as many people. You know your little subculture in that big city, but when you're in a smaller community, you do get to know a lot of people. So you understand teamwork. You get to mimic and be mentored by people one-on-one. So I think there's that work ethic and that those character traits that are built from that and the accountability. And I think there's also that sense of community. There's that sense of a teamwork that you get in a smaller community. There's potluck dinners when somebody gets sick or passes away, or weddings. And I think that just builds that natural leader, and it brings it out in most people anyway, or in a lot of people.
I think that is exactly right. And there's another piece to that I would add, and that is the messiness of relationships and the challenge of having to deal, in our little community, there weren't 5 schools to choose from. There was one school. That's where we went. There weren't 11 churches to choose. There were a couple. And so you didn't have the choice to kind of discard relationships that were messy or you didn't care for. You kind of had to figure it out. And you didn't always get that right. It wasn't perfect. But there was a level of accountability. And it was also that as long as you were in that community, the good news and the bad news was that if you did something untoward, if you did something that wasn't right for someone, it's remembered a long time. And so as opposed to the anonymity that we have in social media today, there was incredible transparency and a long memory. And some of that could be oppressive, so it's not all good. But I do think it's a better model. It's interesting, some of the research on schools right now, I find that kids do better in schools up to about 400, where the teachers and the students all pretty much know each other. When you get into anonymity and lots of people you don't know and you create factions, that brings a new dimension, and we're struggling with that in our society today.
That's interesting. I didn't know. You have, your whole background is so much on relationships and leadership and communication. When you wrote the book, This Land of Strangers, that was 2012?
Yeah, I actually started the research in 2006. It's interesting. My first book was on CRM, customer relationship management. It's an area I worked in. And when I wrote that first book, I was so pregnant. I knew exactly what I wanted to say that I wrote the first draft in 109 hours. Unfortunately, my second book, I spent 6 years doing the research because I had not worked in the areas of home, family, politics and faith. I just worked in business. And so I started the research in 2006. And interestingly enough, at the time the book came out in 2012, I think some people might have said, gee, you've really said relationships are really, in fact, I said relationships are the single most valuable and value-creating resource we have. And I said, we're really in trouble. There's a real, and I have all kinds of stats to back it up. Some people say, well, maybe you overstressed that. And now, if you look at, 2025, we say, no, I probably didn't overemphasize. I probably understated how significant the relationship challenges are that we face. And it's interesting, after I sold my company, I dedicated the rest of my life, and that's the path I'm still on, is to the opportunity to build stronger relationships in our society.
I think. And can I ask you, what have you noticed in the last several years, or what have you learned that you didn't know, or maybe you didn't know that it would be to this extent when you wrote the book, 13 years ago or so? What's a revelation?
I think the biggest revelation in 2012, social media, or the whole Facebook and all that was coming on stream, but it wasn't nearly as strong. And at that time, I did not foresee how social media and the internet and so forth would allow us to weaponize interactions in such a powerful way that leads to divisiveness and animus and so forth. And I also didn't realize how the access to smartphones and the internet would leave us more lonely than we've been. Those trends were already there in 2012, but they have grown. So political animus and the level of loneliness that a lot of people experience as they literally carry the internet around in their pocket has greatly exceeded what I imagined. And I made the case for that in 2012.
That's so interesting. One of the things that I found for many, many years, I was addicted to Facebook, and I could see my level of, it wasn't depression, but there was a level of morose that I carried with me that I never had before. And so I don't know when it was, maybe a year, just in the last year, maybe I decided to I do a morning post every morning on social media, on all my posts. It's an inspirational post or some type of wisdom, and then I'm done. And I'll look at it maybe once during the day. I'll check, and that's pretty much it. Maybe sometimes twice. But I was on Facebook, Robert. Like, I was checking it every hour, and I don't know why. There was nothing I was looking for. It was just an addiction. And I can honestly say that that's been the best move I've made. And I don't know, years, as far as helping my dopamine level. I'm doing what I've done though, unfortunately, is I've switched over to YouTube. so I had to get YouTube off my phone. I do have it on my computer and on my iPad, but it's not readily available on my phone. So I don't have it on my phone. So when I get a break, I'll put on a YouTube podcast or something, but that's kind of that. What I like about YouTube rather than Facebook is I'm not seeing people battle back and forth, and I don't like that. Yeah. And I really don't care what somebody had for dinner. I don't want to see their dinner post.
Exactly. The term that fits most for me for what happens is it hollows us out. It somehow removes some of the most important parts that are in us, in our spirit. And I'm working on an article that'll probably be posted next week on LinkedIn that really looks at, there's a real trend now for just what you described. People are literally going on social media and smartphone diets. Yeah. They're putting themselves on a diet. So just as we pay attention now to what we eat and what we consume in our bodies, we are finally, it took us a long time to figure out how to turn that technology on and use it. It's even harder to learn how to turn it off and stop using it. And that's where we are. And that's the gist of the article that I'll be posting next week.
Good. I'm following you on LinkedIn, so I'll make sure I look for that next week. You had said something to me when we talked a couple of weeks ago that really hit home for me about how technology advances very, very rapidly, but yet our competence advances slowly and our ability to handle that. Can you break that down a little bit? Because I'm really curious about that.
It's a really a mismatch, and I think the widening gap between the speed at which technology is accelerating and the kind of flat line, our ability socially to absorb it and figure out how to use it. Technology is always ahead of competence, but the technology, particularly now with AI coming on stream, has so accelerated that I think we're overwhelmed. And it's going to be interesting to see. There's two things I see. One is the acceleration, and secondly, the issue of trust. Increasingly, particularly with AI and what they can do with images and so forth now, we have less and less trust that the information that we're seeing is accurate or is real or is the basis of someone's agenda that's trying to influence us. And what's happened, I'll use it as an example. If you look at 15 or 20 years ago, when direct mail first came online, people were really impressed. You could send mail out. They hadn't been able to do that before, and they got high response rates, and everybody read all of the letters they got in the mail and so forth and so on. And over time, response rates just went down and down and down. And what happened is the channel called direct mail became toxic, and people didn't believe it anymore. And so one of the things now, as technology gets both more prolific but less trusted, at what point in time will we deem it toxic and basically say, I'm not going to deal with that channel? Just as the example you gave, Facebook became, in your mind, toxic, and you stopped using it. And so when I was in the CRM business and the software business, we talked about the technology adoption life cycle. I think we're beginning to see now a technology rejection life cycle. And none of us, we've always been really poor at predicting how that's going to turn out. But I do believe we're going to see a significant shift as trust continues to decline and conspiracies that are born out of false information. At some point in time, we're going to shut it down. And, do we get to the point where we only trust something we hear from someone we know and trust? I mean, that's kind of where we're headed. So it's going to be that the information develops rapidly and competence develops slowly is going to have a consequence at some point in time that I think is different than what we've experienced today.
Okay, and question for you as well is as technology has changed the way we communicate through text, email, social media, virtual calls and things of that nature. Do you feel that, so if I'm a person out there, I'm a younger person, and obviously I have to be adept at technology because in order for me to succeed in the business world or my professional life, where do you see that person is who can do the technological communication, but is really focused himself or herself on that one-on-one, eye-to-eye contact, the handshakes, that good old school communication? Do you think there's a place in the world for them who will master that art, the old art versus the new art?
Here's kind of what I sense. We're never going to go back. The arrow doesn't fly backwards.
Right.
But I do believe, and it is my hope, that the younger generation, the Gen Zs, the younger people who grew up with technology are going to discover, every generation has to discover their own version of what's true and what's real and what's meaningful. And I do believe there's evidence in the article that I'm working on right now. There is evidence right now that people are going on diets, that Gen Z and some of the younger generations are figuring out how to turn it off and how to set boundaries around it, and are looking for, I'll just give you one example. There's a bunch in there. We've heard about the nuns in the NONES, the nuns, people who have none of the above religions, none of the above. We've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, and I document this in this article, is a significant rise in church attendance in the UK and in the US. And it's primarily driven by younger people. And the speculation is they've been hollowed out, as mentioned before, and they're looking for community, face-to-face community, in-person community, community that is recurring in nature, where those relationships grow over time, where they're asked to give something and they're purposeful in then making a difference with others. That is that they both have to sacrifice something, but they also then give to others. And so, as I say in the article, I think it's too early to say this is a for sure trend, but there's really interesting indicators. And then you look at some of the other things in the article, there's evidence that there's a shift afoot, and we'll see how it goes.
Wow. Is that happening? You said the UK. Did it also in the States here? Is that happening yet?
Yes, it's happening in the US. Yeah,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it's just going to be interesting to see, do we have just innovators and early adopters and it won't catch on, or is this going to be a movement? I predict it's going to be a bit of a movement. How big, I don't know. But, when you look at hollowing out, there's just a couple of things that I cover in there. If you look at the rapid growth of pornography, if you look at sports gambling online, if you look at what's happening in terms of people now taking smartphones out of the schools and finding the students do much better, and the students, as much as they complained about it initially, like it better. Those are 3 data points that I think reflect that we're headed for a new place. And I think, as always, it'll require the younger up-and-coming generations to really flesh that out, reinvent the new reality and make it their own, and then promote it.
Robert, let's hope that happens. I'm going to stay optimistic on that one. Can you think back on any other technology that we've created as a human race that was destructive at first, like social media, smartphones have been? Obviously serve a really good purpose as well, but have been used or bastardized or weaponized like those have, that actually turned around and became an invention that was for the better good. I know when cars were invented, they were, people were afraid that they're going to eliminate families because people are going to are going to live far away from each other because they can travel.
Yeah.
It was going to hurt. They were going to kill horses on the road. They were going to pollute But obviously automobiles became a good invention. Is there any other inventions that you can think of that started off with a lot of negativity and attached to them, then ultimately turned out to be good?
Well, it actually depends. One of the things that I think about is the printing press. Initially, in religious communities, they thought that was really bad, and particularly Catholics and some of the others that were used to doing worship in Latin, they thought it was going to be the end of their faith. And so there's always resistance, and there's always opportunity. And as much as I lament the downside of technology, my wife right now has an Apple Watch. She's had some heart issues, and it's great because they can tell if she goes into AFib. We can see right there. So, as is always the case, the power of the positive valence also has a negative valence, and it's up to us as humans, as best we can, to learn how to use it constructively as we can, and to minimize the downside. You look at nuclear weapons, you look at all the various things that we've done, there almost always is a significant downside, but there's usually also great opportunities. And that goes, all the way back, like you say, automobiles, you go back to the beginning, the wheel, wherever you are.
Yeah.
New technology put some people out of jobs. It gave others more power. It restructured and realigned the hierarchies. And so, that's always a part of it. So our job as humans is to figure out how to make it as constructive as possible. And there will always be downside, and there will always be discomfort. So to me, I'm in the course. I ran a software company for 20 some odd years. I see how valuable it is, but I also see it requires, like everything else, judgment, and it requires us to make good decisions. And we're challenged by that.
Well, and the thing is, I think the best way, when you shared that with me a couple of weeks ago, technology moves quickly, competence moves slowly. It happens so rapidly. It doesn't seem like more than it was, I've been doing, I guess I've been coaching for almost 29 years. And then when I started coaching, I just had a phone that I had to pay per minute on. It was a cell phone that I never use, only for emergencies. And I don't know when I got my first real cell phone. That was one, but it was more like you pay $3 every 20 minutes that you had to make a call. So you just kept it on your person in case. And then now I don't even have a landline. I don't. My mother has one, exactly. But even my mother's landline is connected to the internet. So that's just everything's changed so rapidly. And then when you get, like, I'm at 58 yeans old, so I'm an old Gen X. I'm kind of the older end of the Gen Xers, but then I've got my millennials, I got the Gen Zs in my family. Like, my son grew up on not having a cell phone necessarily until he was a certain age, but they grew up playing video games. They grew up going to school with laptops and internet. And it really, I think you're right. It's up to those generations. It's obviously our generations can lead them and steer them and give them the wisdom and the information and the research that's done. But it's up to them to take this forward and say, okay, we're going to use this for the better good, but we're not going to let it use us. And I think that's what's happening.
In fact, we might say one of their most important jobs is to figure out how to use technology in a way that doesn't destroy relationships. And in fact, builds relationships, going back to kind of my mantra that our relationships are our most valuable and value-creating resource we have. And so that's their job. And they won't do it the way we would have done it. They're not going to go back to the good old days. They're going to hopefully create hybrids and boundaries and habits that support that.
And I think that has to be that generation. I look at right now, and I get, probably every week or two, I get a text from a friend of mine who will say, "Did you see what so and so put on Facebook? How horrible!" And I know that person who posted that, and usually it's somebody I don't follow, because when I see that, I unfollow the person, and that's why people will tell me, and I'll say, "Hey, I don't want to hear what they said." But I still get the texts from usually the same 3 or 4 people tell me. I think that person would never, ever communicate those words to anybody face to face or over the phone, but they will do it behind a keyboard or behind their smartphone. And where does that courage come from? Or that is that, I don't call that's cowardice to me, but where does that desire to be, seems to be more critical, more, destructive communication? Why is that more prominent than it is when you're talking to somebody? Is that just because you don't have to face the person's eyes? You don't have to hear them respond? What causes a person to get that almost technological courage when they're behind a keyboard?
If I were to say the one thing that I think drives the whole challenge we have right now, it is adverse incentives. And in today's world, the more extreme and radical, outlandish things you say, the more attention it gets. So we're in an attention economy that rewards really some of the worst things that get said, the absolute worst. And our technology industry gets rewarded in terms of clicks and followers and all that. So we get rewarded as individuals, and they get rewarded. And somehow we haven't figured out to somehow change the incentives so that rather than weaponizing information and sharing, that we somehow find a way to reward less radical, less attentive, less whatever. And I keep hoping, and your example on Facebook is a good one, that enough people OD on extreme, radical, drama-filled fights and invectives that go on, that over time we will stop rewarding that. We will turn it off, and it will extinguish to some extent over time. Now, we've always been in a world, if it bleeds, it leads. Newspapers, we've always been in a world where we like drama, we like what's new, we like what's exciting, we like what's a little outlandish. But I think what we call the attention economy has to somehow have a recession and even a depression where we reconfigure what's valuable. And right now we got what's valuable as what's not good and what's very destructive. And so that's to me what it comes back to. I see, to your point, I see people who post stuff that they would never say face to face. They got something out of that. And usually what they got was attention from other people who are extreme like them. And it feeds itself. So everybody sees that. That's not new. But somehow over time, we have to figure out a different way of recognizing and incentivizing more constructive behavior.
Do you have any, when you're looking at a person like me, obviously one of the things is to, a social media diet is a good one. Go on a diet. Yeah. Are there other things a person can do to increase their level of communication and relationships with other people around the idea of technology and social media?
Here's what I'm saying in this article that I'm working on, kind of deals with how do we become more intentional about face-to-face and community-based relationships. Technology plays a role in that. It can help us get organized. We can have block parties. We can join church groups. We can join social clubs or whatever. But to date, the novelty of technology and the ease and convenience of it makes it a preference for a lot of people. Actually getting in the car and going somewhere, even being on a phone call with someone, all of those take intention. And what I'm hoping and what I'm seeing in the evidence of Gen Z is they paid enough of a price in terms of learning how they get hollowed out, that they're placing a priority on a more human face-to-face set of interactions, and they're making that a priority. If you look in the business world, for example, COVID, I wrote an article right as we were going into COVID, saying, "Gee, it's the last thing we need. We're going to have not just a medical pandemic, we'll have a relationship pandemic," and we kind of have.
Oh, for sure.
So, kind of what I said is, what if after we get finished of sheltering in place and being in place and all that kind of stuff, that we're deprived of face-to-face and human relationships enough that we come out with some pent-up demand that causes us to seek out with intention to balance our lives more. And I actually think that's what I'm seeing evidence of, is that we are recognizing it. It's hard to break old habits. The convenience of technology is very seductive and even addictive. And that's the right word, addictive. If you look at online gambling, online porn, online dating apps, online scrolling, I mean, it is addictive. We have to recognize that, and that's the point I take. So we literally have to detox. We have to put ourselves on a diet. Doesn't mean we get rid of it. We go on a diet, and with intention, we say, I must seek out the things that more nearly fulfill me. And I'm seeing evidence of that, but it will take effort and intention beyond kind of what we've been able to do in the last 5 to 7 years.
Do you think, you look at scrolling on social media, any of those, it's really you're getting a fake dopamine level. You're getting that short spike in your dopamine, but it's not long lasting. It serves no long-term purpose, and it has resulting negative consequences. That versus having a conversation with one, face to face, or going on a walk in nature, or going exercising, or reading a good book, listening to good music. That's real dopamine. Now, do you think that what I've seen, I don't know what the studies show on this, but it seems like in the younger generation, maybe the Gen Zs, maybe millennials, and maybe in the new one, I think it's called the Alpha generation, the newest one. It seems like there's an increase in mental health challenges and mental health issues with those generations. How much do you think is contributed by this constant levels of fake spike dopamine coming into your system, then leaving rapidly?
Oh, I think that's exactly it. And there is voluminous research behind that. A guy named John Haidt, Dr. John Haidt, a social psychologist who's written the book, The Anxious Generation, validates all of that. And you're exactly right. When we say addiction, it is not figurative. We're saying, no, it is literal. And it creates, like you say, the dopamine. And so that's literally what's going on. And so that's why we're having to to look at it a different way. But it is addiction, and that's kind of what schools are fighting. That's what in so many parts of our life. It's interesting. I work with a group of college presidents. I've been working with them since 2013. And we meet every year and sit down and talk about the issues that they're dealing with. And starting in about 2013, they saw a dramatic spike in the demand for mental health services at these universities. And initially, everybody couldn't figure it out. They were just swamped. Of course, John Haidt's gone back and done the research, and Gene Twenge from San Diego State and others, is that's the point in time that kids started having smartphones. And it literally, the term they use for young kids and young adults, it literally rewires their brains. It changes how they think. And we now worry about AI. Is it going to further rewire our brains? And so it's a big mental health issue. And it's not just anecdotal. It is backed by serious research. And so, Lordy, don't the wheels turn slow? We're having to do this. It's been actually interesting to me, the issue of getting smartphones out of schools has moved really quickly as movements go. Typically, that'd be a 20 or 30-year thing, and it's happened significant. There's 21 states now that are banning or regulating phone use in schools, and there's a bunch more in the hopper to do that. So we're seeing society respond. It takes a while, but the high levels of anxiety, depression, suicide, you go through all the things, kids cutting themselves, all of that jumped dramatically starting at about 2013. So it's very much, it's not just attitudinal, there's actual behaviors, admissions to hospitals for cutting and self-harm. All of those spiked. And so that's what's gotten everyone's attention. So the pain of that is our fuel now to exert, boundaries and decisions and opportunities now to do things differently. And while that's being done in the school systems, part of the article that I'm working on is saying, okay, now that's great for the kids. What about us adults? So it's not just for the kids, although kids have prefrontal brains that are much more susceptible in the developmental stages. It's a factor for all of us.
It really is. And I always think of it this way when, I'm not a fan of gossip, but, and in fact, I'm not a gossiper, but there have been times in my life where I was with certain friends, and those friends are really not close to them any longer, but that when you're with them, that they wanted to gossip, and you get sucked into that gossip. And there's a dopamine spike when you're in that gossip. And I don't know what it is, if it's maybe this feeling that you have information on somebody that they don't know you have, or maybe you feel better about yourself because you're hearing these negative things about someone else, but there's a spike in your dopamine. But then you walk away from that conversation and you just feel gross. You feel heavy. And that's what that's what I felt when I'd scroll on social media, or especially when I would read. And, honestly, maybe up until 7-8 years ago, maybe, I don't know. I would get into those political conversations on Facebook, and I'd be arguing with somebody. And finally one day I said, what am I doing? I just felt horrible about it. I wasn't making any change or positive impact. I was changing no minds. I was not increasing the sense of self-worth of anybody on the other end. I was just being arrogant, insecure, and throwing my ego around, trying to make a point, and just making myself feel heavy and gross the rest of the day. And finally, I just said, no more political posts, no more. You can put anything, and that's why I don't even read I don't read anything that people say about my podcast, good or bad. I don't read comments, because I know me. I'll get on there. If somebody has a negative comment, I'm going to want to argue with them, and I'm like, that. It's not even worth the temptation.
Yeah. And there's a couple other things I would just add to that, because that is right on the money, is that unfortunately in a society where we're more lonely, more separated, disconnected, estranged, that one of the ways to build intimacy is gossip, of talking, of two people talking about a third party. It's a false kind of connection because it's negative. But I think some of it is driven by lonely people looking for some way to connect. And that's one of the more predictable ways to connect but it turns out to be corrosive. It turns out not to be productive. So I think that's part of the loneliness that people have and being isolated is to do that. And of course, the research is clear. What happens in those things is virtually never does one person change somebody else's mind in those arguments. It never happens.
No.
So it is not a productive effort to communicate when you get in that mode. It is simply a way that all sides walk away feeling hollowed out and have wasted their time. So that's part of the reality, and that's what we're having to learn.
And it seems like, Robert, what I've noticed in my immediate circle, or I shouldn't say my immediate circle, but my next level circle in my life, it seems like during COVID and during the quarantine that I saw people either come out of that time frame of our existence a better, stronger human or a much weaker, lesser human. And what I mean by that is I see people who are angrier. They're maybe more fear-based, more opinionated, less tolerant of other people. They tend to be the ones that now, those are the people I get comments from my friends will say, did you see what so-and-so posted? Because I stopped following those people. But there's a select group of people that I can think of that I care about deeply in my life, very much. And I have all of my life cared about them. And during COVID, they just went from a normal, sometimes being a little political on Facebook, or sometimes, saying something that's a little bit, argumentative. But now it's every comment from what I hear they post is incredibly angry and hate filled. And I don't know if COVID had something to do with bringing people closer to social media and it drew them in a little more. I don't know. Is there any research or thoughts on that? Did that have any impact on it?
I think you're right on it, and it's kind of like it's a mechanism that either what you overcome makes you stronger, or if you don't overcome it, it makes you weaker. Some people came out of that and said, geez, now that I've been so reliant on just technology and social media and so forth, I need to go with intention and refine community. And then there's other groups that came out almost disabled by it.
Yeah.
And one of the things we worry about in kids is that during that developmental time, we're seeing that the communication skills of kids, of how you provide eye contact, how you have a discussion, how you deal with disagreement, all that has atrophied as we become much more reliant on social media as our primary means of communication. But it's also happened to adults. So the net is, as a society, our EQ, our emotional quotient, unfortunately has declined, I believe. And some of that is around the horrible animus that exists among all of us. And then the other is the lack of practice and the lack of engagement. So again, to me, what that comes back to is in every part of our lives, in our kids' lives, and our grandkids' lives, and our colleagues' lives, and so forth. I'm asking for people, to be an advocate for reestablishing human connection in a way that we've lost through just electronic interaction.
I'm just trying to write here, so bear with me. And I also think that when I look at the state of today's younger generation and I see them on social media, or I see them on YouTube is where I see them, and they're screaming and yelling. And I think to myself, I never can imagine being in college and doing that. Like I was very blessed in college. I have some amazing friends and we had deep conversations. I was an idiot and I was a fool and I like to drink my beer and go to parties and get in fights and do all the stupid things that you do when you're full of testosterone at 20 years old. But we never really had that kind of anger but then I think about this. I think, okay, if I'm a 21-year-old person and I have been on social media all my life and I'm on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat, whatever it might be, and I start putting in a certain, maybe a political side that I lean toward. And all of a sudden, all I get now is, I'm in that echo chamber. I'm getting confirmation bias thrown at me. So I can never really branch over to the other side, because the other side is crazy. They're Nazis or libtards or whatever we want to, these negative names we want to call either side of the spectrum. And we don't see them. We kind of dehumanize the other side of a political or religious or philosophical argument, because we're only seeing one side. I look at my YouTube. It's all the same thing I like certain things, and those 4 or 5 different topics come up all the time, and you have to pursue to look at the other side's viewpoints. And that's where I see a lot of danger in social media, is the algorithms and how they throw what we like or what we already are interested in back at us, and we don't have to be tested by the other side's argument. And
I fear with AI coming on stream, there will be implicit in AI also algorithms and bias, depending on who's writing the code and how the rules are being established. And, there's research that supports that as a group becomes more the same, that over time they become more extreme. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that in groups that are homogeneous, leaders begin to be picked who are more extreme, and they then lead the group further, and then more extreme people come on board. And so there is an escalation factor from homogeneous groups that are not hearing, as you say, the other side, not interacting with the other side. And so what does that mean? That means we have to intentionally look for communities. And it's not a great place on social media. We look for communities where there is a diverse set of opinions on things, and we hear the various sides. I find, for example, I listen to the news. I have to listen to at least 2 different sources of news to really kind of find out what's going on, because there's not only the bias in how they tell the stories, but in what's reported at all. And so we are right now, as long as we're in these echo chambers, the level of kind of radical extreme moving to the far side is going to continue. And so that's where becoming intentional is so important. The good news is a lot of people now have experienced this. And the question is do we have the will and then the skill to move away from dysfunctional levels of use of technology? Because technology is very good to us in so many ways. So it becomes a matter of will and skill to move to a more diverse set of opinions, and a more diverse set of friends and colleagues, a more diverse set of sources of information, so that we don't fall into that trap, because it happens mindlessly.
The will and the skill, and how that applies to so many things. As you said that, I thought, it applies to just about everything in life.
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah.
And when you look at as you're talking about social media and the echo chambers, I can see where I look at behaviors of certain people, and I would say obviously these are the extremes, but the extreme people, as you said, if it bleeds, it leads. We see them more on the news or social media, YouTube. We see the extremes of both sides. Mm-hmm. But it does seem like there's cult-like behavior on both sides of the political spectrum. And when I think about cults, one of the first things a cult will do is they will separate you from your family and your friends and isolate you into their world. And that's what algorithms do. They separate you from the other viewpoints and bring you into that algorithm of your world, and everybody else is alienated out of it. And so it is a form of cult-like behavior or cult-like direction. And so that's why we see what kind of looks like cult-like behavior in our country and around the world, for that matter. And that separates people dramatically.
Well, it absolutely does. And we have a term for that in the world of sexuality called abusive relationships. Mm-hmm. And what happens in abusive relationships is control is exercised by separating someone from all their sources of connection and so forth. And that's exactly what you described, although it's applied to a cult. It is an abusive relationship where the desire and the effort for control supersedes everything else. And it is in the disconnection that people then lose the capability to move back. So they become isolated, estranged, and powerless. And that happens in sexual abuse. That happens in cultish abuse relationships.
Wow. Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. Do you see, so you have some optimism, though, about the younger generation being able to break through this mold. I'm kind of sensing that. You're holding on to some good optimism.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say, hey, there ain't never going to be another bad day. But I do see evidence of it. And I actually am pretty sure that my generation, I'm a baby boomer, I'm pretty sure my generation isn't going to make much headway. I'm not sure Gen X. I'm looking to what has to happen, I think, in generational change. And I think that's coming. That doesn't mean there won't be other issues, but I am hopeful that that's going to occur. I can't say I'm certain that it is, but I'm hopeful that the next generation has seen enough of the carnage, and they're beginning to experience control of smartphones in schools. It's interesting. You may have seen the state of Virginia passed a law this last week of limiting 16-year-olds and under 1 hour of time online per day. Now, how they're going to enforce that, I have no idea. But you are seeing movements in politics, in our laws and legislation, in our school systems, and in some of the companies. Just one example, work from home. Work from home was a godsend for us, using the technology that kind of allowed us to keep the economy going. But what we know now is there's a big movement. We got people working from home that could, whose job would allow that, particularly college-educated white-collar jobs. Mm-hmm. And now the question is, how do you get people back to the office? Because it's not convenient, and it costs time, and it costs money. And so what we're seeing now is there is a movement back. The research shows that the average number of work from home days has decreased almost a day. I've got the research in this paper, has decreased almost a day from where we were in 2022. So there's another example of someone looking around and saying, at the time that happened, I wrote an article and I said, the research I read says that you are more productive individually at home, but your team and your organization is less productive and less creative. And so a lot of smart CEOs are saying, I know you love the convenience of that, but we're losing culturally and synergistically some of the benefits that we need. And so there's a movement back. So companies are making a movement back. We're seeing churches having more people show up. We're seeing school systems say, we're going to take the smartphones away during school hours. We're seeing movements now around gambling and around pornography. They're very embryonic, of where people are recognizing, it's interesting. When I was growing up, gambling and pornography was viewed as, quote, a sin problem. Right. And that was through the lens of religion. Today, I think people are understanding, well, if you look at it through that lens, it's still a sin problem. If it's excessive or whatever, but we're seeing that suicide rates have increased for 18 to 34-year-olds who bet on their smartphones. We're seeing that pornography breaks up marriages, causes people to go bankrupt. That's always been the case, but it used to be your access was really limited. Today, with a phone in your pocket, you can go broke in a short period of time. So we're seeing guardrails beginning to appear in a number of places. And that's where my hope lies. It's not just an empty hope. It's a hope based on evidence and facts of things that we can measure, things that we can see. It won't be a straight line. There will be challenges. There will be resistance. We won't always get the reforms right. But the problem is large enough and the consequences are dire enough that I believe we as a society will be able to correct. That's what I'm betting on. As a democracy, that's what we bet on. We bet democracies aren't great because they get everything right. Democracies are great because they have the ability to correct. That's the bet.
I like that. One of the things I want to share with you is I've realized one of the things you talked about, working from home versus working in a workspace. Now, I'm a pretty solo I'm a lone wolf kind of guy.
Yeah.
I'm not a corporate guy. I was for a while, and I did have 13 employees at one time working for me. It wasn't my thing. I'm just not my thing. But what I noticed, Robert, over the past several years is I'm on the phone with clients almost all day, 4 days a week.
Yeah.
Or 3.5 days a week. I'm on the phone, and I found myself, then I was talking to my clients, and we text back and forth a lot. My clients and they will text me first thing in the morning till late at night, and I'm okay with that. That's the relationship I like with and emails. I was feeling very lonely, and I refused. I literally refused to do Microsoft Teams virtual calls or Zoom meetings where you can see the person.
Yeah.
And I finally gave in 3 weeks ago. And I said, okay, I'm going to offer Microsoft Teams virtual meetings with some of my clients. And I offered. And I got to tell you, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it because I'm it's not the face-to-face communication. You don't have all of my senses aren't being stimulated, the sense of smell and the sense of touch when you shake a hand, but I'm seeing them. And that's a start. And I realized the difference between in using technology for a good purpose, because now I can look in my clients' faces. I can see their reactions. They can see mine. I feel there's a better connection with those clients and even prospects and other organizations that I'm collaborating with, that I realized, okay, that was the missing link for me. I was using technology, i.e. phone and text and email, but there was this whole new one that is actually better for if you want to connect with somebody, and that's that face-to-face virtually anyway. Then I think, what if we could do more of the actual face-to-face, the shaking of the hands? Because early this year, I was traveling to Grand Rapids, Michigan, Lansing, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan a lot, and I was meeting with prospects, and I was meeting with clients that I have locally in the state of Michigan, and I loved it. Because I hadn't done that in a while, since prior to COVID. Yeah. And so there is a beauty and a benefit to getting away from the keyboard, putting the cell phone down. And if you can't meet with somebody face to face or talk to them on the phone and hear their voice, look at them on do a Zoom call, a Teams call, a FaceTime call with your family. That's just it's a different level of connection. And so that told me right away that technology can be used for good. Especially those clients or family or friends that you just can't. They're in Texas, they're in Washington, they're in Boston, wherever they might be. They're around the country or around the globe. But again, it's when I'm talking to those clients face to face or those family and friends face to face, I'm not going to say the things that 10 years ago Brian would have said on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the thing. You provide a great example. That's what I think is happening millions of times over the days and weeks ahead by millions of people. And it sounds like this. For this group, I'm going to try to at least have lunch with them once a month or once a quarter. I'm going to be face to face. And by doing that, then when I'm in phone or Zoom or Teams calls, it's more valuable because we've met face to face. And people are saying, I'm going to have at least 2 or 3 gatherings that I go to in a recurring way where I have maybe it's social, maybe it's religious, maybe it's sports, maybe it's whatever. I'm going to have a group that I gather with, or 2 or 3 groups I gather with over the next year, monthly, quarterly, whatever. So people begin to say, there's decisions that I can make that doesn't turn my world upside down, that can enhance the relationships that I have, that can help me be less hollowed out, and that can establish a way of being connected that I haven't had before. And it's almost like we went from a default where technology wasn't available decades ago. We've been almost in a season where by default, it's all been technology. Mm-hmm. And now we're saying, oh, wait a minute, I can make decisions to mix this. I can have hybrid kind of interaction game plans for different individuals and different groups of people. And when that happens millions of times by millions of people, we will see a shift in our culture. I think it's already underway.
I hope so. And I got to tell you, I'm going to ask you one more question before we wrap up. I think the work you're doing is some of the most valuable work right now on the planet. And I see that from my own perspective, where I've gone awry with social media, with technology, where I'm kind of coming out of that hole. But I'm 58 years old. When I look at an 18, 19, 17, 15, 25-year-old younger person, I can see that hole is probably deeper for them because they've grown up on that and they don't have the mental capacity or experience or necessarily the wisdom to pull themselves out of it. So I think I got to thank you, because I've got children who I love dearly. I've got grandchildren who I love dearly. And your kind of work I think is what's going to make their lives better than it would have been had this information and this wisdom not have been researched and shared by you and other people like you.
You know, if I were to net that out, and I just totally agree with that, we've experienced technology disruption. And now we need to have relationship disruption. That is disruption that moves us back to relationships. And each of us will have to sit down with the stakeholders and the people we love and figure out how we're going to divide the pie differently in terms of human interaction and technology. And to your point, Michael Porter, the well-known Harvard strategic planner and thinker, said the essence of strategic planning is determining what not to do. And in many respects, that's what we're dealing with right now, is we're going to stop doing some things and we're going to replace that with something different, better, and more fit. And so it starts with stopping something, freeing up space. But then we have to be intentional to replace it. It's not just stop, it's then replace. And that's the business, I think, of the relationship world we're in. The challenge right now is to stop and then replace.
Stop and then replace. I love that. I have one more question for you, and this is a piece of advice. So I've got 5 children, 2 biological children and 3 bonus sons in my life. And with that, we have a handful of grandkids. I have 2 more grandkids coming on the way. My oldest is 4, and the next 2 are coming in the fall of this year. What would you say to my children who are raising young, very young kids, obviously, baby, a couple of them not born yet, to a 4-year-old. What would you say to them for them to be on the lookout as they raise these children in a technological world where they can actually help to avoid some of the misfalls and the mishaps and the pitfalls we have fallen into?
Well, I think, first of all, they probably are seeing it and experiencing it. Yeah. So I think most everybody is aware of it. And the question is, what do we do about it? And if I had one recommendation, it would be, as a grandparent, and this is something that I'm working on, I have 4 grandkids, 9, 8, 6, and 3, is I want to model it for them and demonstrate it for them in a way that hopefully sets a good example. And here's what I mean by that. I've set a goal to as much as I can be physically present with them. Now, that's much harder if they live on the other side of the country and all that, but there's ways to do it. And, whether it's I'm gonna be on site with each kid for some period of time. It's a lunch, it's an afternoon, it's an outing. I'm going to take them on a 2-day fishing trip, whatever it is, that I'm going to set aside a certain number of days or hours to be face to face with them in an activity that will be Outdoor. You mentioned earlier outdoors. Outdoors has a different vibe and a different outcome than indoors. Outdoors, if possible, face to face, one on one, and then in groups. I'm going to look at my calendar over the next 12 months, and I'm going to come up with a game plan on how I'm going to do that. And I think that then provides a model. And rather than preaching to them, you say, here's what I'm wanting to do, and here's why. And that will, I think, be more powerful than any advice is just to model it. And I think it helps provide courage for them. And believe me, I know we've got kids. They are overwhelmed with their kids these days. There's so many activities. They're overscheduled. I mean, they're in a dogfight. So actually, one of the things is finding times when you can take their kids for them for some short period of time and give them breathing space to think about this. So those are the things I would do. I'd model it, and then I would see how I help them free up what their obstacles are so they have more space to do the same thing.
Well, you just gave me two pieces of great advice, and I can honestly tell you I'm not good at modeling it, and I'll share with you why before you wrap up, Robert. When I'm with my oldest grandson, Jack, he'll be 4 next month. So many times he'll say, Papa B, come up to my playroom. So we'll go upstairs in his playroom. What do you think I grab on the way up? I grab my cell phone. And he will look at me, and when he sees me get on it, he'll call. He always tries to get my attention. And so it's funny, though. So I'll put my phone down.
Kids are very dialed into that.
Oh,
they absolutely
so
get
dialed
that.
in. The thing is, sometimes I'll check a text and he'll be playing over the other side of the playroom or the living room, and I'll look at the phone down. I'll have the phone on the floor, and I'll look at it and I'll kind of type, and he sees my head go down, and instantly he notices that he knows I'm on the phone. He knows I'm disengaged and I'm not present. And it's really creepy how well in tune they are to that.
They absolutely get it, and they don't like it. They feel discounted in it. And so, we've done it in schools, phone-free zones, not without phones altogether, but there's periods of time we say no phones. And a lot of people now, no phones at dinner. And a number of people are putting little places to put their phone when you come in the house. So whatever phone-free zones. I'll give you just one other tiny example for me. I help some with our grandkids picking up and taking to school or whatever. And one of the things I do is I listen to the radio typically when I'm by myself, whatever. I never turn the radio on. And I set my phone over to the other side because there may be an emergency. I may need to see it, but I don't take phone calls unless I see it's an emergency or whatever. Just around the very objective you stated, and that is to be totally 100% present with them when you are present with them. So in their presence, being present. And that's a small thing, but the kids really get it. And so as you model it and create habits with those kids, it's fishing, it's going to the park, it's going to a movie, whatever it is, as you create habits of that, my experience is over time, that becomes really golden, and they come to appreciate that there's been space set aside for relationship that is not invaded by technology.
That right there, that last thing you said, be in their presence, be present. And that's one of the things I try to be engaged. I use the word engaged a lot. It's one of my focuses in life with family, friends, and clients. And I honestly can tell you, I'm not as engaged as I want to be. I fail on that one so often. And I think that's a good role model. That's a good rule to follow from this point forward.
Well, and it is really hard because we have all this stuff coming at us. We have to learn that diet we talked about. We got to have phone-free zones, and it'll be there when we get back. But it takes real effort. We are literally having to detox from an addictive force that has some positives, but that we're all dealing with.
Wow. Robert, I can't thank you enough for the work you do. Can I ask you, what's next for you on this subject matter?
Right now, kind of what I'm focused on, as I said, is there's been so much negative about the technology stuff, that all the stuff we've talked about, and it's as real as a heart attack, is I'm trying to focus right now on where's there evidence of progress? What where are the green shoots that portend, we hope, new growth and new opportunities. So I'm really kind of, we all know the problem, and understanding how bad the problem is gives us courage. But then we got to have some kind of vision around, okay, what is this looking like elsewhere? How might I adopt or adapt what I'm seeing others doing to my life? So that's where I'm focused right now is let's look for the opportunities now to move to a next level.
Well, I'm going to knock on wood, and I'm going to send out some positive vibes to you so that this mission you're on can make an impact on the world, because I think it's definitely an incredibly crucial area of study and research, and the work you've done is making a difference. I appreciate you, Robert.
Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks for having me. As always, a delightful time talking with you.
It was a pleasure. And I know there's a lot more of your research and wisdom. I'd like to have you back on in the near future. Are you okay with that? You open to that?
Oh, that'd be great.
Wonderful. Thank you, my friend, for being such an amazing guest. And thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care, my friend. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week. Now, I got to ask a lot of you, if you're a young parent or if you're a young person or if you're anyone out there who feels that you or someone you know has this affliction that probably 99% of Americans or the developed countries do, please share this episode. Robert has so many years of wisdom and research and experience in this subject matter. Please pick up his book, This Land of Strangers, on Amazon. And please share this episode with people you love and care for. Please rate and review us and smash that like button. But most importantly, just sit down and listen to what Robert had to say today. This is groundbreaking stuff, and it's crucial and necessary for the future of our children and grandchildren. I appreciate all of you. As you know, I'll talk to you all again in 1 week from now, same time, same place. In the meantime, please get out there and strive to give and be your best. Please show love and respect to others, and please live with intention and purpose. Until next time.